would like to request the session so that we can utilize it for further uh, purpose. Anant Education Foundation will be putting up this recorded session on their YouTube channel. So anyone wants, they can again look at this session on their YouTube channel. Right. So I will now start. Okay. So welcome you all to the third session of national webinar on questionnaire design and data preparation. In earlier two sessions, we discussed in detail about questionnaire design and data preparation. Today, the basic purpose of meeting is to solve queries, and certain questions were already sent to us through WhatsApp group. So we would be answering those questions and queries today. So what I have done, before we go ahead, I wish all the respected dignitaries, faculties in this group currently who are with us a very happy Gunu Purnima. We are lucky that on this auspicious day, we are in a process of sharing knowledge with each other. So we will start with the wish. And what I have done actually, I have copied your question as it is from our WhatsApp group to this PPT without changing even a single word, and I have tried to cover all the questions that were posted on that particular WhatsApp group, and I'll be answering them in a same sequence in which they are posted in this WhatsApp group. Certain questions we received at the end of session 1 and before the starting of session 2. So I'll start with those particular questions. The very first question we received, that there must be demo how to make questionnaire on Google Form with Likert scale. Actually, giving demo on how to make questionnaire Google Form is out of the boundary of this webinar, right? It was not originally a part of it. Still, I what I have done, I will not give you a live demo, but I have taken certain screenshots. I'll just go through it. So certain people who are not clear or don't know how to make questionnaire on Google Form, this can definitely help them a lot. So I will go through that particular screenshots. Uh, First, this is how your inbox will look like in your laptop, right? You can see on the top right corner there are you can see one arrow. You have to click there and the new window will open, and in that window you need to click on Google Drive. This drive option you have to click when you want to form a Google questionnaire. In this, this is the window that will open after you click on Drive, and you have to click on this new. Once you will click on this new, this is, something like this will open. In that you have to click on more, in that Google Form, and in that you have to click on blank form, right? So Google Drive, you have to click on new. In that a new window will pop up. Go into more Google Form and you have to click on blank form. Then this is how the basic format will look like, right? In you can see this is how it will show you initially. The untitled form would be there, no title, nothing is written, right? And if I explain you the basic some working, you can see this plus symbol in the circle. That symbol you can use by clicking there. You can add question in your questionnaire. Second symbol which is there, you can import question from some other file which you have. You can import the question as it is from some other part of your PC. Then add title and description. You can see here untitled form. If I want to add title and certain description about my questionnaire or whatever I want to write about my topic or something, some some I want to inform that the data will not be used for any commercial purpose. It will be used only for the academic purpose, and something I want to write, I can write in form description, and in title I can write my research title. If you want to add image in here, you can add image also in the question. Suppose some marketers want to study with respect to certain print advertisement, so they can simply put an image of a print advertisement in the question, and then they can ask the uh, certain questions with respect to that image. You can also have, you can also add video. Suppose I want to add some video advertisement, or some YouTube video, or some recorded video, or anything, I can add video also in my question. If I want to have sections, if you know, we talked about this section technique in our sequencing of the question in base session 1. If you want to have a section, you can use this tab to add sections, right? And the section technique in Google Form you can very well apply. So these are the options, you can utilize it. Once you click on the question, these are all the type of questions that you can use in your Google form. First is short question. In short question, suppose you want a kind of a name of the respondent, or any short question you want, right? So that you can use. If you want to have an open-ended question, you can see the second paragraph. If you remember our session 1, I gave you example of open-ended question. I want to give a blank space to the respondent. I will use this paragraph in which he can write. A paragraph will have more character capacity as compared to short answer. Then you have a multiple choice. If multiple choice means multiple choice and single tick. If you want multiple tick option, then you should go to check boxes, right? A circle will represent the respondent will be able to click only on one option, but when you have a square represent that there are multiple ticks. Then if I don't want multiple choice to be presented directly at all once, I can use the drop down option. In drop down option, all the questions will be reflected in a drop down menu. All the options will be reflected in a drop down menu. Then file upload. If I want to upload some file in options, I can use this. Then linear scale. Now the question originally was how to frame Likert scale in Google Form. So if you want to frame a Likert scale, you can use two options. Option number 1, you can go for linear scale. Option number 2, you can go for multiple choice grid. In both the options, you can frame Likert questions. Then tick box grid, multiple choice grid and tick box grid. The only difference is in multiple choice grid you can tick only one option. In tick box grid you can option multiple, similar to the earlier part, multiple choice and check boxes. Then if you want to respondent to be update some date and time, or date of birth you want of respondent, you can use this date and time tab. Suppose then I have gone one step ahead, and I have suppose added this topic in title in my research, a study on employee engagement in banking sector. Now this is my research title, and I have written my research title. I have not added any form description, but I have given one instruction: please rate following statement based on your opinion. 1 is equal to strongly disagree and 5 is equal to strongly agree. I want to use Likert scale. Then my first statement I will write on question: I often feel emotionally detached from my job, and I will go and select linear scale option as I shown you in the last slide. Then it will show me 1 to 5, one label, and label I can, whatever I want to write, I can label. In label I can write the options. What are we writing? Strongly disagree I will write in 1, and strongly agree I will write in 5. So this is how my question ultimately will look like to the respondent. I often feel emotionally detached from my job, right? And he can see strongly agree, and 1 2 3 4 5 strongly disagree and strongly agree. So this is how I can put this. Actually is a kind of semantic differential scale where bipolar opposite adjectives are put at the extreme end. If you want exact Likert scale kind of a question, you can use multiple choice grid. But in both the difference is the only thing: in multiple choice grid, you will be able to write all the options by 1 is equal to this, 2 is equal to this. But in linear scale, you can only write the bipolar adjectives. In both the way, you can frame your question. Then I can add second question in I find my job challenging. Again, I can write. I don't need to write every time strongly disagree, strongly agree in my question. I can simply use this tab to duplicate my question below. I will click on this tab, the same question will be duplicated. Then I only change the statement. Rest all will setting will be automatically will be there. Suppose by mistake I add some wrong question, I have option to delete question also, and I want my respondent to answer all the questions which I ask in my questionnaire. Then simply he can click. I can click on this required. Once required button is on, then respondent cannot submit the questionnaire without answering these particular questions. So if you make all your questions as required questions, you will not receive any incomplete questionnaire. So your editing part is almost uh, removed, because in online, because in editing, you will not be able to, you don't have any incomplete questionnaire, you are not receiving, so incomplete questionnaire would not be received by you. So this was all about question one which was asked. Some other question, can you also include how to frame questions for focus group discussion and in-depth interviews? Again, similar to first question, again this is also out of the boundary of this webinar, right? Because focus group discussion and in-depth interview, the ask questionnaire, how to frame questions is a different topic altogether, and it requires a lot of time. It cannot be explained in a very short span of time, because you need to have a slightly different technique when you go for qualitative research. Instead of knowing exactly which kind of question should I use, which kind of wording I should use, in qualitative you should have the art of probing, art of asking the questions, because in it is totally different than the structured questionnaire. Here in focus group or in-depth interview, hardly you will have anything which is structured, right? You will only have initial questions which are structured. So mostly focus group and in-depth interview, you will not have always a pre-defined set of questions. Majority of the time in focus group and in-depth interview, you will have unstructured way of asking the question. Many a times your question is, next question is dependent on the previous answer of the respondent. The entire method is very unstructured, right? So it cannot be included in this webinar. It is not possible to cover all the aspects, but the only thing I can suggest, that you need to develop art of probing. Art of probing will help you to be an excellent researcher in qualitative research, especially using focus group discussion and in-depth interviews. Another question was, one question from my side, so can we identify data of our research study before designing a questionnaire? Please mention, as on the basis of synopsis and review of literature, further how can we identify data? uh, Definitely we cannot identify our data, but we can definitely identify the type of data we want to generate. That you can surely identify it from literature review and certain other past studies before designing a questionnaire. That is actually, I already mentioned in my one of the slides, that before you go for questionnaire design, in pre-design stage, if I'm not wrong, once on stage number 4, I explained you should be very much clear in which kind of statistical test are you planning to apply on that particular questionnaire. Suppose in my literature review, if I can see majority of the past researchers have used XYZ statistics test, and I am very much inclined to use the same test, then I need to be very much clear which kind of data I need to generate, right? Data type means whether nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. So I can design my questionnaire in a way which can result into certain type of data, and not exactly the data which I want, right? So here I would slightly rectify the question, that we cannot identify the data, but we can definitely identify the type of data required to be generated after, at the time of data analysis. Definitely you can decide this. Not you can, actually you should decide this in advance before designing a questionnaire. Then a very good question on how to analyze and do coding for open-ended question, right? Uh, This I need to explain with an example. Otherwise, if I simply explain theoretically, most of you will not get it. So let us understand with example, right? Let me show you one open-ended questions and the responses we have received. So the question was, what could we improve? Now, simple question. Some companies suppose doing some uh, satisfaction survey or a feedback kind of a survey, and they have asked an open-ended question to the respondent that what could we improve. Then certain answers they have received are as like this: the fees are too high. Somebody wrote, I would like to receive more financial advice. Somebody mentioned the range of service is too basic. The website needs to be updated. The software is not very intuitive, and some similar 15 responses are received. Now this was an open-ended question, and we, as we know, in each and every open-ended question we keep on getting different responses, because we are not providing any set of options to the respondents in advance, right? Now, as a researcher, I want to perform certain statistical tests on this question, open-ended question. Now we cannot apply statistical test on these words and statements, as I mentioned in one of the topic, that we have to convert. The basic objective of coding itself is to convert the words and statement into numbers. But here I have talked about only 15. What about 150? I cannot give coding to each and every options which I have. So I need to reduce this number of answers which are given by the respondents. So how I can reduce? I have to reduce it by making various categories, and the based on the applicability of the category and the nearness of the option, I can put each and every answer on certain category. So how can we develop this category and how can we put them? Let us understand. Right. The first is the fees are too high. So I can say this is something with respect to price. Right. So I will name it as a price. Then second, I would like to receive more financial advice. So here something I can name it like advice. This is something with respect to I want advice as a respondent. Right. The range of services is too basic. So here the respondent is not happy with the services. I can name it as service. Then the website needs to be updated. Here the respondent is slightly unhappy with our technology. So I can give here name as a technology. So I have already got four categories in first four option, and I could see they are not matching with each other. All the four categories are exclusive in nature. They are not overlapping. So I'll go further. The software is not very intuitive. Now website, technology, software is also related to technology. So I can keep question option answer number 5 again in the same category. I can write the technology. So this will be combined. Then lack of communication. Now earlier all the four options which I have designed, price, advice, service, technology, doesn't fit here anything in with respect to communication, right? So I have to open a new category that is known as communication. Now again, 7, better advice. Now advice I can see in option number 2. This is also similar to that, so I can add this into advice. So definitely I can mark it as advice. So now I have two answers in advice. I would like to hear more often from my accountant. I would like to hear more often. So something with respect to communication, that he would like to have more communication from our side. So I can categorize under communication. Could use more modern technology. Now again I can put this in under technology. You could send text messages instead of emails for more important information. Again, you could send text messages instead of email. Now, initially, if you look, it looks more like a technology, but the issue is not with the technology, issue is with the communication platform. The respondent wants to have a text message instead of email, so I will put under communication. Could send more useful information. Again, with respect to communication, it would be good to have another way of share documents. Another way to share documents means here he is talking about some other technology and which is not currently applied. So I will put it under technology. The website looks too old. Technology, it should be cheaper. That means something with respect to price. Option number one, you can see fees are too high, and here a respondent says it should be cheaper, so I will put it in price. And faster response to my queries, so where we can put it, faster response are not received by the respondent, so he wants or she wants a faster response, so here gap is in the communication. So this is how I have divided my 15 responses. And if I have more responses, I will keep on doing this activity on option number 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 80, 100, 150, and I can categorize in various options. Now, somebody might be thinking that what if more and more categories are opening up and we are not able to justify it in several categories? So here the standard advice which is generally given by standard references, that you should generally go for 8 to 10 categories and not more than that. So even if I have 150 or 200 or 300 responses in open ended, and I can go for one 8 to 10 categories. And what if some options are not at all falling under any category? So for that you can develop one category called as others. So eight, suppose I have developed 8 categories and ninth would be others. So I will keep on posting each and every answer in one or the other category. If I see a mismatch between the answer as well as the categories I have developed, then that particular answer would go into others, right? If you want, later on you can again refer the other category in which you have posted certain answers. And if you now find something with respect to similarity in options in all the responses you have posted in others, then you can combine those options and develop the ninth category if applicable, right? If you cannot find it, right, then you should put more and more options into others category. Now when it comes to frequency, so here price as an option category has 2 frequency, advice has got 2 frequency, service has only 1, technology has 5, and communication has 5. This is the frequency distribution of 15 responses I have received. So now as a researcher, I can identify the major issue of the company is with respect to communication and technology and not with respect to price. Now how to do coding? Coding would be similar to like we used to do in close-ended questions. I would give price as code number 1, advice would be code number 2, service would be code number 3, technology would be 4, and communication would be 5. And I can enter these particular options with these categories into statistical software on a Microsoft Excel or whatever I want to use in my analysis. So this is how I can do coding, categorize my open-ended answers, questions which I've asked, and I can do coding and frequency calculation. This I have explained you on 15. You can do is on as many options as possible. Again, I am simply repeating, do not go for more than 8 to 10 options, categories. And if certain options or certain answers which are not falling under those 8 to 10 categories, you can simply develop one category as others. I hope this makes clear. Okay. Then the next question, how can we check relevancy and accuracy of the questionnaire? Relevancy and accuracy of the questionnaire is nothing but the criteria of good measurement that we discussed with respect to validity, reliability, and sensitivity. Relevancy is another word used for validity. Validity is a technical term used in research in simple language. If we convert validity word into simple language, it is nothing but relevance. How relevant my questionnaire? Relevant means what is it measuring, what it is supposed to measure. And accuracy also talks about the validity part of the questionnaire, how accurate it is, right? So this is nothing but validity and reliability you can check. Okay. Another question, for any question there can be two answers from the respondents. First, what is actual situation or behavior, and second, what should be the situation or behavior. If any respondent is giving answer on the basis of what should be the answer, would be entirely different. How can we frame the questionnaire so that we can get the actual response rather than what should be or idealistic response? Now, here, uh, my first suggestion would be you should never have you should never allow respondent to respond in the same way which he thinks would be the answer. So how can we ensure the second part of the question, how we can frame the questionnaire, that I will show you with an example. It's all about the magic of the wording that you use in your questionnaire. Right now, here I would like to mention, uh, when you are administering the questionnaire, there are two possibilities. Possibility number one, that you are there in front of respondent or in contact with the respondent to assist him or her if any query, right? If this option is taken care by you and you are there to assist, then this problem should never occur. When it comes to self-administered questionnaire, self-administered questionnaire means here respondent is uh, filling up the questionnaire on his own without any assistance from the researcher. But if you are going for option number one, again you should need to be very much clear that your presence or your assistance should not create a researcher bias in the response, right? So that has to be very much taken care by the researcher. So how you can design a better questionnaire with the use of wording, I will give you one example here. You should be very clear in providing the instruction to the respondents. If you remember, I explained you something with respect to transition statements when we talk about the sequence of the questions. You should very well use these transition statements effectively, right? I would like to give you example of service quality model. Right, service quality model it is also known as SOWCOL model, which is very popularly used by marketers in measuring the service quality. Right. So when we talk about Saucol model generally needs to identify a gap, and one of the gap is the gap between the expectation and the actual. Right. So here, what the question covers, what should be the ideal and what is the reality. That suppose this particular measure try to covers both. Right. So how we can go about it? Just focus on the wording of these statements. So to study the expectation, what you can write as a researcher, please show the extent to which you think bank should possess the following features. Right. Extent to which you think banks should possess. Right. That means we are talking about expectation when we talk about the following feature. And when we want to know the actual, that is also known as the perception. Why it is known as perception? Because actual you want to identify, but still actual can be a perception of the respondent. That is the inherent nature of this Saucol model. To study actual, you can write, please show the extent to which you believe State Bank of India has the following feature. Right. So bank should possess in expectation, and bank has when we talk about the reality. Even I need to take care of this in our questions itself. So what, when I'm measuring the expectation, what kind of wording should I use? Excellent bank will have modern looking facility. This is one of the question in Saucol model, one of the statements when we talk about the service quality dimensions. One of the statements is like this: excellent bank will have modern looking facility. So this is expectation. But when I will talk about SBI, then I will change my framing of a statement. SBI has modern looking facility. Now in above, it may very well be possible that respondent says on Likert scale, I strongly agree that excellent banks should have modern looking facility. But when you ask them SBI has modern looking facility, he may very well say only agree, or he can also be disagree with the statement. So this gives you the gap between the expectation as well as the reality. Right. Another question you can have is excellent bank will give customers individual attention. This is an expectation. What do you expect from a bank? Do you think that they should give customer's individual attention. So here your answer can be anything. But when I talk about actual, I can write like SBI gives individual attention on you. I can have a Likert scale and I can simply agree or disagree on these particular aspects. So when you have to control the opinions in terms of the respondent should, you want expectation to be given as an answer, or you want reality, your focus should be totally on the wording part of the questionnaire. The wording, the kind of wording you will use will ultimately ensure the kind of response you are getting. So you need to very well work on your wording part, right? So that will give you a better insights when you want different uh, options from the respondents. Some questions, some more questions. What is Cronbench alpha? Somebody asked about it. Now this question was asked in session after session 1, and Cronbench alpha, which is internal consistency reliability, was covered in session 2. So I think this question doesn't need to be answered, because Cronbench alpha is one of the technique to measure internal consistency reliability of the questionnaire, right? How to apply this test, Cronbench alpha, and what are the conditions of the same? The conditions can be nothing, a very simple test. This should be Likert scale. How to apply this test? If you want to know how to apply this test in SPSS, right, or in that, but next webinar is coming up. In that, we will be talking about the basics of statistics, and we'll also be talking with respect to various statistical parametric and non-parametric tests. In that webinar, we'll also show you how to calculate Cronbench alpha, not only how to calculate, but how to interpret the value of Cronbench alpha also. That will be covered in detail. The next webinar will be focusing on this introduction to basic statistics and SPSS. In SPSS also, we'll be covering everything right from introduction to SPSS till coding and data entry, and everything will cover. We'll also show you how to do various non-parametric and parametric tests. Uh, Very soon, within 2 or 3 days, you will receive a new brochure with respect to that particular webinar. So those who are interested to know further about SPSS and basic statistics, it is very much linked to this webinar. So I would actually suggest those who have attended this data preparation till that time we have covered in this particular webinar. After data preparation, you directly have data analysis. So in that webinar, we'll start with the data analysis, and we'll explain you entire data analysis with respect to SPSS. So that will be very useful webinar to many of this, and we'll be using the same questionnaire which we have used for coding here in that particular part in that webinar, and we'll also give you the sample data set so you can also practice the same at your convenience, right? So how to apply this test will be taken care in next webinar. Can we use questionnaire already used in literature? Yes, you can definitely use a questionnaire already used in literature. Somebody, I think, replied to this question also in the group. But additionally, I would like to mention few things. When there is an established questionnaire which is there in the literature, you should first check the authenticity. Right, you cannot simply use any questionnaire that you find on internet. You need to check the authenticity and the usability and everything of that particular questionnaire, right? Many projects you will find on Google. So first of all, do not find anything from Google. Rather, you should go from use it from Google Scholar, right? Also see the number of citations that particular research paper has got, and it will also guide you on whether to go select that particular questionnaire or not. Suppose I have found a very authentic questionnaire which is it got a lot of citation and has been applied by many researchers. Still, I cannot simply copy that questionnaire and I can start using it. Of course, I will give due credit to that researcher, but many a times when we go for questionnaire, the questionnaire originally is developed for some other cultural context and some other language, right? So we need to very cautiously revise that particular questionnaire in our context, cultural context. Some of the wordings also you should, if required, should be changed, and accordingly without making major changes in the questionnaire, you can definitely change certain portion of them and change it to make it more useful in your cultural context. You can convert that. After converting that, you should go for face validity, which I explained you in content validity part. Once you redesign the questionnaire, you should go for it. You can very well show it to some experts in academics as well as industry to ensure that whatever the original questionnaire that you are referring and this questionnaire with minor changes you have done are measuring the same thing. Otherwise you will fail on the construct validity part. If you have done major changes, your entire objective of using that questionnaire will be in vain. So there are so many things to be considered before directly using the questionnaire. Moreover, if you think like I need to translate this questionnaire in my local language, that is an additional step you need to take care. Right, in translation also you need to ensure that whatever language you are translating is exactly reflecting the same meaning in which the original questionnaire, which probably would be in English, is reflecting. That you again have to ensure with some experts. And you need to also do the back translation. Suppose I convert, we are from Gujarat, I convert some questionnaire from English to Gujarati. Again I need to convert my Gujarati questionnaire into English, and I should understand that both are measuring the same thing. So there are certain processes you need to undergo before using the ready-made questionnaire. And whenever you use this questionnaire, you should very well give due credit to the researcher from whose research paper or from whose literature you have used that particular questionnaire. So you can use, but certain cautions are there that you need to take care. The next question is, if I'm using SEM, structural equation modeling, in which scale I should ask my question. If you are planning to use SEM, you should try to generate interval and ratio data. You should not have nominal and ordinal data. Try to generate data into continuous scale, right? That because there are certain preconditions of structural equation modeling. There are certain other conditions also which we have to refer before using it. Okay, when we conduct PG or PhD survey, is there a possibility to give two type of questionnaire to the sample? Now this was an audio question. Some respected faculty posted an audio in our group. I have tried to convert that audio in as much possible as the same wordings I have tried to kept. When we conduct PG or PhD survey, is there a possibility to give two types of questionnaire to the sample? How we justify giving two questionnaire to the sample, same sample I mean. This is with respect to the question with respect to split ballot technique. Uh, in split ballot technique, the first correction that I would suggest you to understand is you are not giving two questionnaires to the same sample, right? You are giving two different questionnaires to two different samples. That means one sample is not receiving two questionnaire. One sample is receiving only one questionnaire, and the other sample is receiving the other questionnaire. So first correction or suggestion I would to be clear in your mind that we are not giving two questionnaire to the same sample. We are giving administering one set of questionnaire to one set of sample and the other set of questionnaire to the other set of sample. So we are not offering a say two questionnaire to the same sample. That was point number one. Second, in the same question, madam has asked for certain reference part of slit ballot technique. So I will not only provide you certain references here, I will also show you, I will also send this soft copy of these papers so that you can study further, right? Because split ballot technique, I have only shown you one portion that in split ballot technique I talked about reframing the same question in an alternative way. That is only one part, right? Otherwise you can have change on sequence of questions also, right? Both questionnaire may have the same question, only sequence can also change, right? That is also you can use in split ballot technique. Another thing that I would like to tell you now, when the question is already asked, in I explained you that you have to divide sample into two parts, but you can divide sample into more than two parts also. So you can have four questionnaire also, and you can have four set of samples also. So I have given you the example in which I have talked about you can divide sample into two, right? Sorry, the one answer that I missed. Uh, when we conduct PG and PhD survey, is there possibility to give? Here I will have to give certain long answer, because when we talk about split ballot technique, generally it should be applied where the sample size is known to you and the samples are known to you and under your control. When you go for a PG or a PhD survey, you are going for a very large survey. And what we generally do when we go for online survey, we try to make our questionnaire link viral. We try to send it to as many people as possible through emails and WhatsApp and social media. Still you can apply. How you can apply? And let me tell you, you can make two links for two different questionnaire, or you can go for two physical questionnaires, and you can ask as many people as to fill up. Suppose I am trying getting 1,000 samples in my PhD, and I have received questionnaire number one 600 responses, in questionnaire number two 400 responses. Then I have to go for additional fill up of questionnaire of my second questionnaire. So 100 I will go extra. So now I will make 500 in second. And in the first questionnaire set in which I have received 600, I have to remove 100. So then I have to keep balancing between the two set of questions. It has to be equal. So that is a certain extra exercise you have to do, right? These are certain references. The first two references are actually books. Cooper and Schindler, a very popular book in research methodology, talks about split ballot technique. Second is also a book by Naval Bajpai. He talks about split ballot technique in very much detail. Then there are certain papers I have highlighted in references. These papers are those papers who have specifically talked about split. They have used split ballot technique in their research paper. In majority of them you can see split ballot word is used in the title itself. So the major burden of the entire research paper is taken by split ballot technique, and this is how actually they have done their research. So all these references you can put in your research paper or your PhD thesis if you are planning to use split ballot technique. I'll be sending you soft copies of this paper also. Then where can we find the standardized questionnaire? Is there any database for the same? Also, if there is no standardized questionnaire available in literature owing to uniqueness of the topic, how can we standardize our frame questionnaire? Uh, Actually, there is no database available for a standardized questionnaire. Uh, if you are from management and especially in marketing, if you are there, then there are certain books of marketing skills, ready-made marketing skills. There are two three books which are very popular. They are having marketing skill, a handbook of marketing skill, something like. You can search on Google. The soft copy may also be available. If I will find, I will definitely send handbook of marketing scale. Now this handbook of marketing scale is only talking about various ready-made scales which are popular in the field of marketing. So here you can have a sim. But if you are referring some other, if you are from some other field, then there are no such database in my knowledge, because I don't have much knowledge about other fields. But as far as my knowledge is concerned, ready-made database is hardly available when it comes to questionnaire. But definitely you can do a good literature review, and you can develop your own database of various questionnaires, right? Once you go deep down into literature review, you will have n number of questionnaires with you with respect to topic. Second portion, if there is no standardized questionnaire available in literature owing to uniqueness, if there is no standardized questionnaire available, you have to develop your own questionnaire. You can develop your own scale, and you have to pass through the entire scale with various validity and reliability measures before publishing a research paper. You have to establish lot of activities on how to standardize our scale, right? There are lot many papers available only on how you can standardize your scales. That definitely you can do. I would like to know about the construct with an example as it was mentioned in one of the slides. Again, this is the question before session 2 started, right? So in session 2, when I explained the valid construct validity, I explained the exact concept of construct. So it must be clear a construct is nothing but group of variables, right? So that is already answered. How can we make a question using constant sum scale in Google form? Is it possible? Okay. No, it is not possible to make constant sum scale question in Google form. They have not come up with this kind of facility yet. Next question, internal consistency reliability talks about correlation between items or statements of same construct, whereas convergent validity also talks about correlation between items variables of the same construct. So what is the difference? One correction I would like to make, in if you have some misconception, internal consistency does not talk about correlation. Right. It may be possible when you combine all the constructs together, still the internal consistency would be high, because internal consistency has nothing to do with correlation. Internal consistency checks the consistency of the responses given by each respondent by comparing the responses of other respondents at the same time. So you can imagine the huge iteration is happening within the software, and if it checks your each response on each statement with responses of all the respondent in the same statement, right? And then how it will calculate the internal consistency. It has nothing to do with the correlation, right? So internal consistency, reliability, and convergent validity are totally different, right? Where validity is objective is to know what it is measuring, what it is supposed to measure, while reliability talks about the consistency part, right? Then every time if you will try to measure, will it generate same result or not? Okay. Likert scale generates which data, ordinal or scale? Now this is a very big question in the field of research. I will try to answer it the best possible way. The first part of the answer, I have to answer this into three parts. First part of the answer, difference of opinion still prevails in the world of research for this, right? Still there is a huge debate on whether Likert scale generates ordinal data or it generates the interval data. You must have seen in my presentation that I have considered is an interval, right? I'll show you certain uh, references also. So difference of opinion still prevails. How it prevails and what is the logic, I will try to explain you the same. This is a screenshot of one of the book. You can see this explanation which talks about the Likert scale, right? And I have highlighted with one red box that the the Likert scale does not rise to a stature more than that of an ordinal scale, right? So here in this book was written by C.R. Kothari, Research Methodology, Methods and Technique. According to C.R. Kothari, Likert scale generates ordinal data. This is from session number 2. Now this is another book screenshot. You can see Likert scale generates ordinal. This was by Ranjit Kumar, 2019, Research Methodology, a step-by-step guide for the beginners. Right. So he mentions that Likert scale generate ordinal data. This is one of the book I mentioned earlier from Naval Bajpai, Marketing Research. He has also written another book on business research methods. Right. In his books, he mentions multi-item scaling technique generally generate interval type of information, and one of them is Likert scale. Right. So one of them is Likert scale. So multi-item scaling technique generates Likert uh, interval type of data. So according to Naval Bajpai, Likert scale generates interval type of data. This is another very standard book which I mentioned earlier, Cooper and Schindler. The screenshot from that book, right? The Likert scale has many advantages, and at the last statement he writes, the scale produces interval data. So Cooper and Schindler, a very good book for the beginners in research, right? A very well referred book in the world. They mention the scale produces interval data, right? Now I have also read all these books. I have tried to understand, but none of them are trying to justify why they have considered as ordinal and they have considered as interval. When you go further and try and identify more and more inquiry on this Likert scale, there are some logics which are coming out in some books and some references. That logic I want you to explain, right? Let us understand in next slide. This is a normal Likert scale will look like: strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree. Now, those researchers who consider this as an ordinal scale have an argument. When you talk about Likert scale on disagree and disagree, suppose strongly disagree and disagree will give you an order. Somebody who is strongly disagree is more disagree. So you get an order. Somebody who is agree and strongly agree. So I can say strongly agree is a person who has higher agreeableness as compared to only agree. So it gives you an order. Can you say how much is the difference? In interval scale, I explain you, we need to know the difference also, right? How much is the difference between the disagree and the strongly disagree? Are you able to say that? No, I will not be able to say that because I can only put them in order. So those people who try to justify as Likert scale as ordinal always justify in this manner. You can only have order of agreeableness or something which you are studying. You cannot identify the difference between the same. Then certain researchers argue with this. Okay, suppose you have written numbers, right? When I give strongly disagree as 1, disagree as 2, neutral, agree, and strongly agree, I am giving them assigning numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So suppose in my questionnaire I have put this box and not the above box. Then I don't only I not only know the order, I also know the distance. Somebody who has written disagree and somebody who has written strongly disagree. So first I know the order. That is a basic characteristics of an ordinal scale, right? So order is written. Order is already I come to know that somebody who has disagree and somebody who has strongly disagree. I know the order, but I know the difference also. Difference of 1, right? 1 and 2, difference of 1. 2 and 3, difference of 1. Neutral and agree, difference of 1. Agree and strongly disagree, difference of 1. So now I have equal distance between all the 5. So somebody who tick on agree will be 1 point lesser agree as compared to somebody who has ticked on strongly agree. So many researchers have tried to justify on this basis. This generates a Likert, this generates interval data because you don't only know the order, you also know the distance. Again, on this argument, the people who have ordinal favoring ordinal have argued that when you have an interval data, you need to have a continuous data. That means it can be anywhere in between 1 and 2 also. While this is on the discrete, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There are no in between values available, right? You don't have an option to have 4.2, 4.26, 4.29, or 4.95. You have 4 and directly 5. So this is discrete. While interval data's basic requirement, it should be able to generate continuous data. That means in between values should also be possible. So again, the counter argument happens that this is an ordinal data. And so this battle is continuing, right? So if to be very specific, in a nutshell, I can only say that I am not in a position to clearly defend whether it is ordinal, whether it is interval, because the debate is still going in the world of research, right? As many reference you can refer, the debate you will easily find out. But then why I have taken it as an interval? Ultimately, when you see a further study, it is ultimately on the discretion of the researcher. And if you refer many research papers from scholarly journals, Many of them consider Likert scale as interval, and the basic logic behind considering it interval is it allows you certain more freedom to perform many statistical tests, because when you talk about data which is ordinal and you talk about data which is interval, there are n number of more statistical tests you can apply on interval data as compared to ordinal data. So many researchers take this freedom of this battle, take advantage, or they consider they are on the interval type of data, so they consider it as a interval data. So ultimately as a researcher, it is your discretion how you want to take it, because somebody who will argue in front of you does not even have the same kind of argument, that you cannot take Likert as interval, because I have shown you two good references from a very popular books. They have considered this as an interval. I have also given you references which considered you as an ordinal, Likert scale as an ordinal data. So whatever you want to put, you have reference already given by me. So you can use those references and you can go ahead with your research. This was a very difficult question to answer. I tried my best to answer the same. Then the next question was, if factor analysis is applied to a questionnaire, does it take care of all the validities? No, factor analysis basic purpose is to know the underlying structure of the questionnaire. Right. Factor analysis basically concerns with the dimensionality of the scale and not the validity of the scale. Dimensionality of the scale means, suppose I have one construct, and that one construct has been considered in unidimensional, means only one factor. In suppose USA, right, some researcher in USA has developed some construct or a scale, and he has identified that scale is unidimensional, means this all the items measure only one construct. But when I try to use the same questionnaire, even before the validity I need to check the dimensionality, that in USA this scale has one dimension. Does it have the same number of dimension in my country, in my situation? That you need to check. The factor analysis is concerned more about that. Here again, some more clarity is required when you talk about factor analysis. So basically, are you talking about exploratory factor analysis or confirmatory factor analysis? Both have different objective and different operations to be performed. When we talk about confirmatory factor analysis, it will definitely take care of certain validities, right? So which kind of factor analysis you are talking is also should be understood in this question. How to decide whether we should use 5-point sensitivity or 7-point sensitivity scale? Is there any rule for it? No, there is no clear cut rule on this. It should be decided on the two parameters only. Parameter number one, how much sensitive responses you want from your respondents, right? How much sensitive response you want from your respondents, that will tell you and give you, you have to decide on 5-point and 7-point scale. And second, are your respondent in a position to give you differences between this sensitivity? If your respondents are not in a position to justify the smaller differences that you put on 7-point Likert scale, then you should go for a 5-point Likert scale. But when you refer many literatures, right, in international research, especially in the field of management and social science or humanities, where questionnaires are used very much, right, they consider a 7-point scale as a better scale, but still there is no rule for it. You can definitely always use 5-point scale also. Midpoint affinity neutral in 5-point Likert scale, so it is advisable to use 4-point scale. Okay, so there is a neutral in Likert scale, that something was I was highlighting. You can use 4-point scale, right? You can use 5-point scale also. Basically, it is not with respect to number of points. It is basic concept is talking about balanced scale and unbalanced scale, right? You can see the balance scale on the left side. Very poor, poor, neither, good, and very good. Now here I have something with respect to neither poor nor good, so something with respect to neutral in the middle. So I am trying to keep the balance between the poor side and the good side. So this is known as a balance scale. On unbalanced, you can still use 5 point, but you will not use neutral as a center point. You can see very poor, fair, good, very good, and excellent. I have not given any such option to the respondent in which he can talk about the neutral or neutral point in this particular field. So now why should I use this unbalanced scale, or we can say when should I use this unbalanced scale? When you don't want your respondent to be on neutral side, means you want a clear cut response from your respondents that I will not allow you to be on the neutral side, I will not allow you to escape by staying on the neutral side, you have to give me answer on either side. At that particular time you can use unbalanced scale, right? If you want to genuinely allow your respondent that if he is genuinely neutral, you should take on neutral, you can use a balance scale, right? It is nothing to do with advisable or not advisable. It is ultimately the question, ultimately the choice the researcher has to make at the time of conducting a research and designing a questionnaire. What percentage of cutoff is required to take decision in illogical uniformity? When we talk about illogical uniformity in editing part, there is nothing like cutoff, but you should identify certain questionnaire. These two things are known as acquiescence bias and extremity bias. These are part of survey errors. Acquiescence bias and extremity bias means when respondent has tend to take only on either side of the responses without considering the questions, right? The acquiescence bias and extremity bias are the errors which can be generated in certain, by looking at the response sheet you will be able to identify. Suppose I have got 25 literature Likert scale statement, and I pick up the questionnaire which was ticked by filled up by some respondent, keep on considering only strongly agree, has ticked only on one portion of the questionnaire, I will understand it is illogical uniformity. There are also certain ways to deal with it. For that you have to make your respondent read your questionnaire. And how you can make your question respondent read your questionnaire? Understand the psychology of the respondent. What happens when I start as a respondent reading the question? Suppose you are measuring some attitude towards some banks, and you have asked me certain question. First one, two, three, four questions I am reading, and I can see you have written everything good about the bank, and I agree on that. So I'll stop reading from question number statement number 5, 6, 7. I'll start on ticking on agree side, assuming that you have asked all the questions in a positive side. I am happy with my bank, so I don't need to read the question, and I'm directly ticking on agree side. If I'm dissatisfied customer, without reading I'll start ticking on the disagree side, right? So how to deal with this? You have to make your respondents read. So what you can do, you have to mix your questions positive and negative. First two questions you ask positive, third question you ask negative. That means first two question I have written something like a bank services are good, second bank's timings are good, third I should write negative, the staff behavior of the staff is very poor, right? So now the respondent will be forced to read the next question because he thinks that just by simply ticking on the same side will not do, because the researcher has asked mixing of questions positive and negative in my particular uh, this questionnaire. So he will try to force the respondent, and even after mixing of this question, still the respondent had take only on one side. It's a very well symbol that respondent has not read your questions at all. So certain questionnaires which are showing very illogical uniformity should be removed. There are no such clear cut percentage of cutoff. Kindly provide reference for combined usage of offline and online methods. I am giving you certain references. I will also send you this soft copy of these papers. When you combine two methods of survey, it is known as mixed mode surveys, right? Mixed mode surveys, you can have web based, paper based, or you can have mail and email, you can have telephone and email. There are various mixed method surveys. I have tried to keep these references whereby only offline and offline are online combined. So these references and research papers you would be able to refer at a later stage. Please give coding for constant sum scale. Okay. uh, when I explain you the coding part, I use one statement I very well remember, that ultimate objective of coding of any question or any responses is to convert text and sentences into number, right? And when we are directly receiving numbers, we should not convert anything with respect to this questionnaire, because I am directly receiving my responses in numbers. In constant sum scale, what we are receiving? We are receiving directly numbers. So if you remember in that video, I explained you how to code force choice ranking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I told you not to give any coding to this force choice ranking because you are already receiving response in numbers, right? So in constant sum scale, I would not do coding. Whatever response, whatever marks the respondent says assigned out of 10 or out of 100, I will directly write that particular marks in Excel and in whatever software I am using. I have tried to given you one example here. This is the exact questions options. If you remember, constant sum scale, how rate the attribute of a car on 5 parameters out of 10: looks, mileage, price, brand, and interior. So this is how I have received certain responses, and the total has to be 10. So you can refer column F, the total of A, B, C, D, and E, the total is 10. So these are all the responses that I have received. Once you have responses, you can simply put a formula and calculate mean of it, and uh, the total of mean would also come 10, right? And you can simply identify the most important feature. You can see the highest mean is received from 3.07, that is the highest, most important. Second is mileage, third is price, fourth is interior, and fifth is brand. So these are the results. So this is very well you can perform in Excel or SPSS or anywhere. No need to do coding of constant sum scale. How can we check criterion ability? Rather, I think the word should be validity. How can we check criterion validity? By using correlation with other standard measure, as we don't know that they have data and information about the respondent used in the standard measure. Criterion validity, if you have to check, you have to check it with some standard measure. If many a times in research paper, the results, the scale means, and other important data of standard measures are given. If the data are not given, you have to use that standard measure and get new data filled up at your end. Then you can develop your own scale. Then you can also have data filled up in the new scale. Then you have to compare the responses received on the standard scale and the respondent received on your own scale. Then you can measure the correlation and you can identify, right? So criterion validity is not that easy to check. It's a quite cumbersome activity. That is why you will not find many researchers going for criterion validity, right? So it is not that easy, right? So that is how you can do. Is there any difference between neutral and can't say if we use 5-point Likert scale? Yes, there is a lot of difference between neutral and can't say. In neutral, the respondent probably is having knowing the answer, that I am neither agree on the neither agree side nor the disagree side. So he knows the answer, right? In can't say, either he doesn't know the answer or he doesn't want to reveal the answer, right? But when we talk about scale, Likert scale or cementing or anything, right, you should never use this can't say in those scales. You should always use the neutral. Where you can use can't say, you can use can't say in dichotomous question to balance the earlier two options. I explained you in dichotomous, when I want to balance yes and no, is death penalty justified, right? Yes and no. Now I don't want my respondent to put in a in a manner of dilemma that you should clearly agree or disagree on one side. Then I can additionally put one option as can't say, and I can allow my respondent to be side to this particular response. So when you talk about Likert scale, you should not use can't say option. You should go for neutral. I think these are all the questions which were asked by the participants in WhatsApp group, right? So now I have tried to answer them in best possible manner. Now, if you have any other question, you can ask me, right, with respect to these two sessions or whatever explanation I have given you today?
Sir, this is already, though you have tried to answer it already, this question is about that internal consistency. Though I understand that reliability and validity are different things, but still, as per that video lecture, in internal consistency, reliability, also we were trying to find relation between the statements, item statements. It was written there. I'm not saying correlation, but relation between the
Uh,
item statements. And
Correct.
similarly, in
Uh,
convergent validity, we were trying to find out relation between the variables. That is what I understood from the video. So that question is still not clear actually.
you
And
are not measure.
my second question is how to validate a questionnaire. That's all. Validate and yes, sir. These are the two questions. That's all.
Okay. Again, I am repeating my answer would be same. Internal consistency doesn't have anything to with the correlation, while convergent validity talks about the correlation. So that is the basic difference. When you doesn't have anything to do with correlation, they are not the same thing, right? I explained you how internal consistency is calculated also, right? It is basically calculated. It will compare the respondents response on one question with one statement with other respondents, and he will try to check the consistency, because in internal consistency you are only going for cross sectional research, so you don't have the option to compare your responses of one set of you have received and with the previous one. So here you will try to compare the responses received by the various from various respondents in the same way. And one more thing, it may be possible that while checking the correlation between construct number 1 with construct number 2, the correlation would be very low, but when you combine all statements together, your convention alpha would still be high. Mostly it will be high because the responses which are received are different in nature.
Thank you, sir. And the second question, how to validate a questionnaire?
Yes. In my video, I have explained you a very basic way of knowing the convergent and discriminant validity. You can further validate in some other methods using confirmatory factor analysis. Also, when you go for confirmatory factor analysis, you can validate this by the value of AVE, average variance explained. It has to be above 0.5, right? So this is another way of measuring. So when you talk about smart PLS, there are other way of measuring discriminant and convergent validity. When you go for smart PLS, the discriminant validity will be checked in 3 levels. You go for Faulkner and lever, then you have a HTMT value that you have to consider. So each particular method is having their own particular way of measuring, because when you go for SEM, it is covariance based. When you go for PLS, it is partial least square method, and when you go for SPSS, it is simplest way. So when you are trying to measure in SPSS, you have a different way of doing it. When you go for a CBSCM, you have a different way. When you are going for PLS, you have a different way of checking the validity. When you are trying to validate the questionnaire, you can start with exploratory factor analysis to check the dimensionality, and then second stage you should go for confirmatory factor analysis. In that you confirm whatever dimensions you identified. At the same time you check the content and convergent and the discriminant validity.
Sir, but SCM, covariant based SCM is already a combination of factor analysis and regression. So,
Yes.
do we require to validate questionnaire there in SCM, covariance based SCM?
Yes, before going for a final model run in your structural equation modeling, it is always advised to have advised to run confirmatory factor analysis. Once your confirmatory factor analysis are showing perfect result, then only you should go for structural equation path analysis.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, I can read certain questions from chat box also. Please tell us the date of SPSS webinar. It will be communicated within 2-3 days. Where should I write transition statement in Google form? In transition statement, you can in Google form you can write where the description is there. You can use that description space very well in your Google Form. Once you, if you have not used Google Form, I would request you to at least go to Google Form once, and it is very user friendly and very simple to operate. You can go there and you can definitely identify. Is there any relation with reliability and validity in a test? They are the two different things. Reliability talks about the consistency part, and validity talks about whether it is measuring what it is supposed to measure. If want to use SEM but nature of study is qualitative research, then questionnaire should entirely be in Likert scale only. Yes, not only Likert scale, but you can use other scales also, and even you can go for ratio data. It should be in continuous. The data should be generated in continuous. Kindly share reference of scales discussed in session 2. Which scales? I am not clear, madam. Can you please explain which scales you are talking about?
Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, madam.
Sir, I had sent the question. Sir,
Hmm.
the scales that you had used for the single scales to the multiple scales, sir. I mean, there are a couple of scales, Likert scale.
Okay. Madam, these scales are available in almost all the books of research methodology. So whatever books I have mentioned in earlier other references, you can refer them. The same is available in majority of the books.
Okay, okay. That beautiful. So, can I ask one question? Is it okay?
Yes, yes, tell me.
Sir, I work in college. So when we have dissertations, our children bring up with the questionnaire. So now there is a norm that once you take up a authorized questionnaire,
Hmm.
you should not remove some of the questions. But
Right.
it is very difficult in a sense. Of course, we go for culture adaptability and sensitivity. But the
Correct.
problem is, these questions are not for example, eating steak, which is
Hmm.
not water polo. These things are not in our community, so we don't
Correct.
need some of those
Correct.
questions.
Correct.
So
Correct.
how do we manage this? In a sense,
Yes.
it is said that we have to abide by the whole questionnaire. I always have a problem with this questionnaire
Correct.
stuff. Yeah, please.
Madam, I already, if you remember, I already answered the same. You can justify it with the face validity, right? Face validity, when we go for the face validity, what you are trying to prove before finalizing the questionnaire, you are going through experts in your field, and if possible, not only academician, you are also need to visit the industry people with vast experience in your field. And once you have face validity, in face validity, if they suggest you, okay, these are not the Indian habits, and you can remove this or you can replace it, it will be justified in your project or dissertation. And once the face validity is done, it will not be questions.
So
It
you
will
mean to
not
say,
be.
so your suggestion is prior to we present the synopsis with the questionnaire, we need to conduct face validity and content validity
Correct.
and
Correct.
then submit it. Okay, sir.
Correct. We need to go for face validity before sending questionnaire to everyone, before even pilot study.
Okay, okay, okay. Thank you so much, sir. That was a big relief. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes.
My question is, where should I write a transition element statement in Google Form? In the section you said somewhere there?
Description. You can also
No,
add
the
description.
transition statement you said.
Yes, yes, I am talking about transition statement only. If you have
Uh,
seen the screenshot which I presented today, I have written one transition statement before the question starts, right? So the transition statement should be written in that, but you can also add one particular description there. Add description. There will be one option as add description. Once you will have add description option, it will open one particular small section, and you can write your transition statement there.
but that is on the top of the question. I want to
Yeah,
change
you
the
can add
page
it in between also. You can add it in between also.
at the bottom also, because I want
Yes,
to
yes,
add
you can
the
add.
transition statement at the bottom of my page
Yes, you
before
can add
translate.
that. You can there also. Anywhere you can add that.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Number of questions required for standard research. When we receive certain questions, a number of questions required for standard research, the simple answer can be you should ask as many questions as required, and not a single question should be asked. which is not required. So after making your basic questionnaire, you should do one self-analysis, that is this questionnaire helpful in my research. If not required, you can very well remove, unless and until if it is only a rapport building question and opening questions as mentioned earlier.
Sir, in different research papers, sometimes only few validities are checked and rest are not mentioned in the research papers.
Correct,
So
correct.
how do we know which validity should be checked in which research kind of a situation and which validity should be left?
Correct. So to be very frank with you, there those researchers who are not mentioning all the validity must have in backstage must have checked those validities, but probably the results are not coming as desired, so they have not mentioned in that research paper, right? So when you are trying to check the validity in your questionnaire in your data, you should also check all the validity. But if certain results are not coming, the many researchers avoid putting that data. But my suggestion is, even if the validity does not permit you that this validity, you should mention that suppose my questionnaire, my data shows the convergent validity, but it lacks the discriminant validity. There is nothing to display whatever result, nothing wrong in displaying whatever results are there.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. So my
Good
question is related to the previous question. So is it mandatory to test all the validity like construct and criterion? If we are suppose we are doing only the content validity and criterion validity and we are not doing the construct validity, will it create any problem?
It basically, madam, deals with the objective of your research, right? And the kind of journal you are targeting or the kind of study you are doing, right? When you go for a very scholarly journals and kind of PhD thesis, they generally expect you to check as many validity as possible. But when you are not going for very scholarly journal or PhD thesis, it is not mandatory to check all the validity. My suggestion is to check all the validities as far as possible, right? And whatever results are there, you should display in your research paper or there, or there are certain ways also to improve these validities that you can find out.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so the soft copy of the books, I will try. If I will have, I will definitely send. Otherwise, whatever research paper I have mentioned, I will definitely so. Is there any norm for page length of questionnaire for PhD? Is there anything like ideal page length concept? No, sir, there is no ideal page length concept, but definitely the questionnaire should not be so long that the respondent, just by picking your questionnaire in his hand, simply denies that your questionnaire is not at all. I am not able to fill it up because it is too long. So how can we actually deal with if my questionnaire is long? You can deal with the same in layout part of the questionnaire, right? You can very well do the formatting in your word, and the formatting should be done in a way that questionnaire doesn't look a big questionnaire, right? You can adjust the font type and font size in a way that whatever I am trying to uh, no, my questionnaire should not look very big. The designing part of the questionnaire will take care of this length of the questionnaire. Another suggestion, try to make sections in your questionnaire, because sections will look your questionnaire shorter, right? Because respondent will take look at your questionnaire only as a section. Psychologically, it will have impact. That suppose in this section I have 7 questions, so I will just look at it as a 7 question. Then next section I will again have a 7 question. If you will just putting all the questions in the sequence, it will look a big questionnaire psychologically. So ideal length, page length is nothing to do. But if I suggest you, do not go for 4 sides. Do not go for more than 4 sides of the questionnaire. That should be the perfect length, right? And if you are going on more than 4 sides and it is very much required to you add all the questions, you should take care of the formatting and layout part. It will definitely help you.
Sir,
Yes.
So one more question, sir. So in this questionnaire method, I think one of the most crucial part would be the response rate. We are always asked to mention about the response rate. So I have
Correct.
seen in some places it is 75. Some we anticipate it would be 80, and then the statistician would tell us that the sample size will be accommodated. You know that technical terms. So how cautious we should be regarding the response rate, and what are the best method to avoid volunteer bias? Thank you, sir.
Okay. When we talk about the response rate had to do with more with the method of survey you are using rather than the questionnaire, right? In my in my session, one of the slides in pre-designed state talks about which method you are using. Generally, you will have a higher response rate on face-to-face survey method as compared to mail or electronic, right? So response rate, if you want higher, you should be working on your research method rather than the questionnaire quality of the questionnaire. Research method will help you to reduce or increase the response rate that you are talking about. Okay. Any other question, anyone?
Sir, while filling someone's questionnaire, I came across a practice like people are adding the same question to different section in the same questionnaire, like they are repeating. So once I asked
Correct.
that scholar that why have you done this? Like this question is repetitive. So then she said that
Hmm.
I have done it deliberately so that I can check
Deliberately.
that
Correct.
the respondent is taking is duly filling the form or not. He's taking interest in that filling up the questionnaire or not. So is it a good
Correct.
practice?
Absolutely. Yes, madam. I told you one of the way of mixing the positive and negative question. This is another way of ensuring that responder is checking, reading the question, right? And sometimes it is to verify the whether the same question is answered in the same manner by the respondent or not. So this technique is very well applied by many researchers, right? At times, even if not repeating the same question, you can slightly modify the question and you can ask on the later sections. This definitely can be done in your questionnaire.
Sir, my question is when we are coding those questions. So I know that the questions are repeated. So while coding, should we skip that question which we have deliberately repeated? Like what should be done to that question which I have repeated?
Yes, if it is the same question you have asked without changing anything, you can skip. Otherwise, no need to skip the same. If it is similar and not the same, you can keep it. But generally,
Sir,
when you
what if?
see, hmm,
Yes, sir. Please say.
generally when you have a same question, it doesn't make much sense. In this technique, I would not suggest you to ask the same question. I would suggest you to ask the similar question, right? And that similar question, if you ask, you can continue coding the same and use it in your analysis.
Okay, sir. So the main purpose is to check that whether the
Yes.
respondent is serious or not. So what
Yes,
if we found that the answer are just opposite? That the same
that
question
is
he
what
has
I'm
answered
coming.
agree.
That Yes, that is what I was coming to. That if you want to check it, you can analyze those two questions separately before doing the entire analysis, right? You can check the reliability part on that particular thing. You can run the Cronbench alpha also, and once you identify that the questions are answers are same and almost similar, it shows the high reliability, you can remove also. So that is again, if I say rather than a standard rule, it is more toward the discretion of the researcher.
Okay, sir. So what if we found out that no, this he was not serious at the time of filling up the questionnaire? So should we discard the whole questionnaire because of that? What should we
uh,
do? Like it
Again,
would be a great loss.
yes, it will be a great loss. That is why I use the word discretion of the researcher, right? How much important it is to you, you can decide. You can, if you remove some responses from that particular respondent, then you have to remove the question from other respondent also. So it is the overall decision what you are trying to take in your analysis that you have to take. right? Because ultimately it is the discretion of the researcher. You as a researcher have to decide.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So if now there are no questions, we can declare it as over, or is there any other question? Okay, so it was a wonderful time with all of you today. I hope I would be able to do some value addition. So thank you very much. We can now discontinue the same, and you can leave the Google meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Kindly let us know the time and date of the next webinar, sir, please.
Sure, sir. You will receive a message.
Thank you.